Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Path Builder podcast series, where we continue to have conversations with professionals and entrepreneurs who have taken on really interesting career paths, or as we like to call it, purpose driven careers. My name is Rachna, and I'm back for this podcast episode with Maithili, who is currently the sector lead for agriculture at Villgro Innovations Foundation and has put on varied hats in her professional life. And I'm really excited to learn more about her journey. Hi, Maithili. So glad to have you here with us.
Hi, Rachna. Glad to be here.
Okay, so without um, wasting any more time, I'm going to jump right in, Maithili, and get to know more about you. So, I mean, from what I've understood, you worked across a range of organizations after your MBA from IIM Ahmedabad. And it's gone from like working in the corporate sector to a social enterprise and now working in the space of investment and incubation. So, can you
Yes.
tell us a little bit about your motivation to go from, working with HUL to then working with the social enterprise Saahas?
Yeah, absolutely, Rachna. So, to give a better idea of sort of who I am and where I come from, I think I'll start from the very beginning. So, I grew up in Pune. I did my schooling in Pune, and then I did undergrad in Bombay. And in all those years, I probably trekked through all the hills in between. Very fond of sports, outdoors, an avid trekker. And I've always been close to nature in that sense, and that's a theme that I didn't realize then. It was always a hobby, but came to play out later in my career as well. So how did I choose HUL? So I completed my MBA from IIM Ahmedabad, and at that point I was interested in HUL. Given the options that I had in front of me at the time, I felt the work was exciting. I also really respected HUL for their sustainability mandate. I thought there was a lot of work that they were doing there, and was interested to explore some more. So I joined them after college and was with them for a while. In that phase, I learned a lot about sales and marketing, especially on ground sales, managing large teams. But after a while, um, I felt that I wasn't uh, close enough to what I wanted to do. I wasn't close enough to this path of sustainability, which I had been sort of keen on. In my free time, I was following some content on waste management. Pune happens to be quite waste. There happens to be a lot of awareness about waste management in Pune. It was, in fact, one of the first municipalities to pass bylaws for waste. There's been segregation at the society that I grew up at for years, even before it was a norm in other places. So it was a problem that I was aware of and a solution that in parts I had seen in action. And it was sort of serendipity when I was following Saahas, and um, they put out a social media advertisement saying that they were looking to hire for multiple roles, one of them being for heading their sales and marketing function. And I thought, why not? So I applied. I was in my later 20s. I was excited to do something different, new, adventurous, work with a startup. So packed my bags, left Bombay, and came straight to Bangalore and started working with Saahas. My adventure with Saahas was it was lovely. Over 2 years, it started with waste, but it went much deeper. Through Saahas, I learned about all the pressures on land and water systems. Um, and through research and meetings with folks in the space, I realized that while waste is a huge urban problem, agriculture is at the pan India level a huge villain. Agriculture consumes 85% of our freshwater reserves and is the second largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions in India. An interesting profile because typically agriculture isn't the second largest in most other countries. It's electricity followed by various other sectors, and agriculture is lower. And as I learned more about this, I wanted to be in a place where I could sort of work with multiple teams on sort of a larger landscape of sustainability. what also happened at the same time was that at Saahas, I was playing a role where I was, apart from my sales and marketing work, interacting with their investors, and I was involved in investor relations at the time. I enjoyed those interactions. I felt I gained a lot of value from the inputs that our investors then had to say. And again, at that point, I came across Villgro in a sort of co-curricular sort of sense, like in one of these events. And I just thought that the work that they were doing across agriculture and climate action excited me. It covered agriculture, a bit of waste, distributed renewable energy, multiple themes, and affordable healthcare. And that's when I had a conversation with the now CEO, Srinivas, in an informal capacity, and I was really interested by the work that they do, and that's how I made the shift.
Wow. Thanks so much for sharing this. And I love how you started with talking about you being a nature lover, you love the outdoors, and then you sort of found the themes of sustainability and land and agricultural systems and water systems and all of that. I think kind of seems like it's followed a lovely path right there. So thank you so much again for sharing that. And I'm just wondering, you know, with these transitions where you sort of found your way based on what you felt was most aligned to you at that point. What do you think you gained most out of these, different roles and experiences? Or if there are any highlights or lowlights that you could share?
Right. So I feel the transitions are both exciting and hard, right? So I think the nice parts about them was that, at least for me, it was a journey of self-discovery. With every transition, I felt that I was moving closer to what I wanted to do. The path that I have chosen is one that I didn't have a role model for. There wasn't anybody at home who was in the social sector, or in any of my educational institutions, especially at MBA. At that point, I didn't have any immediate person to sort of reach out to, get career guidance from, and it happened very organically for me. So as I took every next step, there was that feeling of, there was a bit of a risk that I hope it's the right step. But as I kind of lived through each experience, it felt right. And I think those were the sweetest moments, when I'd be probably just sitting at my chair in office and thinking, I'm glad that I made this decision. And, this is either the work is interesting or exciting, or even that it's hard, but that I'm enjoying it, or I'm finding it so much more fulfilling than what I was doing. So I think that was the best part of the journey. Regarding highs, I feel those more than any skill set, it's usually anecdotal. It's when somebody said something, or when there was sort of an eye-opening interaction with someone. And I think just partly out of recency effect, I think the two that come to my mind, the quickest one is in agriculture, where with Villgro, I was visiting a village near Motihari in Bihar, and we were looking at financial inclusion solutions. And we were actually just doing a sort of a focus group discussion with a bunch of farmers to understand what their needs were, to later see how to bring in the angle of credit access and so on. And one of the basic things that they said is, the government has pushed out a particular nano urea product, which we're not sort of sure how to use. And it's been difficult for us we haven't seen the right outcomes in the field. And and the regular urea has been stopped. So we don't know where to sort of get our inputs anymore. And they were so confused, and many of them had been swindled in the black market trying to get products which were not available in the market anymore. And I just realized that the startup that we were looking to work with, not only were they providing financial access, but they were providing the right quality inputs to these farmers at their doorstep. And that's what the farmers felt was the biggest gain that they had, that they didn't have to go into the black market and they didn't have this kind of uphill struggle. And I just and sitting on that little bench in that village and listening to them, I really felt that, I'm just so fortunate to be in the space where I can play a role to impact any of these stories. And with Saahas, I'd say it's less of a story and more of a visual. I remember first entering their material recovery facility after it had been constructed, and we had just received waste from a couple of our large uh, um, B2B players, industrial players. And I remember walking into the MRF and seeing more than probably 1,000 bags of waste, dry waste that had been knotted and piled one on top of the other till they reached the ceiling of this very of this industrial warehouse, which had a very high ceiling, and just standing in front of those bags and feeling so tiny and thinking, oh my God, this is such a big problem, and we need to take much bigger steps to solve it. And yeah, that visual is still so fresh in my head, even though it's probably a couple of years old. And on the lowlights, I think from a career perspective, I think every time you make a transition, you do lose a little time. It takes a little, especially when the transitions are in absolutely different sectors, right? You take a little time in a new sector to just understand its ins and outs. What are the problems? What are the solutions? What are the solutions that have been tried and have failed? Therefore, what would be new aspects? So, and by the time you get that grip on it, it's been a while, right? And then you can sort of think of new approaches, new ways of solving the problem. And if there's and knowing that there are two things. One is that you kind of are okay with losing the time, and then you say, okay, you know what, it's okay, maybe I'm going to take the first couple of months just to learn. Or then you're working overtime, you're working extra hours and weekends and trying to like make up, because there's this feeling of urgency that, okay, you know what, there is so much out there to learn, and I'm only on day one. So, and I think I've been in both places at different points of time. With Saahas, it was that urgency of, my God, I'm already behind. How do I make up the time? And that was definitely there. And I think with Villgro, less so, also because I joined just when the pandemic hit. So almost there was this period of where I was like forced to take a step back and just sort of take a breath and learn. And that was also lovely. I realized the benefit of probably starting a little slower, understanding the scenario, getting some time to read, dig one's heels in, and then running. So yeah, I think definitely different experiences. But really, the best part of the transitions was moving closer with every transition, and finally getting to not just that sector, but that role within the sector, which kind of align my values with my strengths, and could actually show some tangible output. So which made me feel um, fulfilled. So I think that was the best part.
Wow. Thanks again for sharing this. And I think a couple of things I want to just highlight again. I think when you were talking about the story from Motihari, and you were talking about how you could kind of use that space to actually learn what the farmers are actually facing and understand the situation. And I think that's critical, right? Because in the sector, a lot of times people do jump to conclusions about what needs to be done. And it's just so important to just connect to the people that you're actually working for and hear them out. And yeah, and I think even with Saahas, what you talked about, just the vastness of the problem organizations like them are solving. And the fact that you actually found alignment there to kind of work on that problem. And then you also talked about Saahas from an urgency point of view as you join. I mean, for that, a lot of those kind of seem to come together. So that was wonderful. Thanks so much for sharing those. I'm also curious, I think when you started answering this question, you talked a little bit about, every time you went through a transition, you're obviously taking a risk and you're asking yourself, okay, am I doing the right thing? But in hindsight, it all worked out well. I know with these kind of transitions and taking the risk, it's either you figure out how to navigate through it or you power through it, right? So what was
Right.
your way to deal with that?
So I think you need a little bit of both. If you're only powering through it, you're going to probably get just exhausted after a point. So you have to figure out a better way. But I think the first few months need a little bit of powering through, where it's probably overwhelming, and then it's quite cyclic, right? So it starts with probably being a little overwhelming, new, information overload, just too many stimuli, right? And at that point, you just have to kind of hold ground and be like, no, I'm going to get through this, and I'm going to get through this and get on top of this. So, that's definitely there. And then once a little bit settled in, and that's when you start understanding what you can do next and kind of navigate the ins and outs. I'm thinking if I can find some example that will kind of bring this to life. I think with Saahas, there was this, I think the two things that I learned the most, I mean, of course, there was all the technical know-how of sales and marketing for a small business, which I had to kind of pick up on the go. I had worked only with large organizations before this. So that was one piece of it. But the biggest learning was a soft skill, which was courage and resilience. Because when you walk into a boardroom and you want management to spend a lot of money to clean up their waste, something that they have taken for granted, expected the government, municipalities to do it for close to nothing. It's hard. You're one person in that boardroom. There are probably like 4 or 5 senior executives, and it's very difficult to get them to change their mindset, something that has been built over several years of work and experience, and resilience, that even if a few folks reject you, that that what you're fighting for is right, and that you have to go back and and fight that fight again, right, the next day. So I think there was a bit of powering through, and I think where the navigation came in was, okay, how can I reach out to them and have them hear me, right? It is new to them. It is something that they don't want to probably work with, but how can I put myself in their shoes and have them sort of hear me out?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And so, I mean,
Rachna,
yeah.
I'm really sorry with that question. I don't know what to answer.
Yeah, so thanks, Maithili, again for sharing that. And it makes a lot of sense. And you do also talk a little bit about, the different roles require different kind of skill sets and maybe just different kind of attitudes as well. So, I mean, what kind of, diverse set of skill sets have you been able to pick up across these roles? And do you now feel like you've been able to tie them all together, through experience in corporate, social enterprises, or startups? And now with the work that you're doing at Villgro?
Right. I mean, I actually at Villgro, I do feel that. So I'll start from my time with HUL. So my role in HUL was primarily in sales, and I think the skill sets that I needed there was a lot of quick data crunching, being great with, I'm talking about the technical skill sets, of course, being great with Excel, being able to look at a lot of numbers and glean from that what the insight is. It also needed a lot of process management and working with very large teams that were also diverse in nature. You had salesmen, then you had territory sales officers, then you had the leadership, the ASMs, you had folks above you. So being a large organization, there were just so many kinds of people that you were dealing with on a daily basis, right? People who were similar to you, people who were very, very different. So I think, and at a very young age, you were probably dealing with folks who were probably double, like twice your age, right? So I think people skills and people management was also something that I learned there, and process management. There is when you're working at that scale across geographies and in so many crores of rupees, every decision is very precise and goes through a very set process. And being able to manage all the pieces of the process and get a project through within or a deadline through within the required time, I think that is definitely a skill that I learned there. With Saahas, it was absolutely different. Very startup culture in that sense. Not very heavy on process, not heavy on data. Sales and marketing for a small scale business is very different. It's a lot more narrative driven. There's a lot more passion, a lot of qualitative understanding of who's your target market. And so I really had to kind of go back a little bit to the textbook, B school days and undergrad, and be like, wait a minute, what did they teach us about small business sales and marketing, and what did they teach us about like branding? I need to go back and read up. So I did a little bit of that. Some traditional, segmentation, targeting, and communication kind of marketing. But with Saahas, I felt that, as I think I mentioned previously, the biggest learning was on the soft skills, the courage we needed with every in different forums, whether it was when we were going to sell our solution, whether it was defending ourselves to investors and internal stakeholders on numbers and customer reactions, whether it was standing up and speaking at roundtables and conferences on the need to solve a problem. And I think everybody appreciates that waste management is a problem and needs to be solved. I think what a lot of us don't appreciate or don't completely understand, myself included till I worked in the sector, is what it really takes. The time, the effort, the money. I think a lot of people underestimate the economics of it, right? And getting that point across is so hard. So I realized the value of a couple of these things: communication, courage, resilience. And at Villgro, the new thing, I think, which was different from these two previous jobs, was just wearing multiple hats. At Villgro, sort of, we're working with so many companies, which, while they are under the larger umbrella of sustainability, each one is tackling such a unique problem to understand their subsector within climate, within agriculture, within water solutions, and to help them, figure out their bottlenecks, solve for these. Requires me to change hats not only multiple times in a month, but almost multiple times in a day. Previously, my roles were very related to sales and marketing. There was a functional focus area. Well, today I sometimes have to work on operations. Sometimes it's a financial issue to solve. Sometimes it's marketing. So I think that ability to switch, to quickly learn something new, and to be able to deliver quickly on a new problem statement every day is what I've learned at Villgro. So far, it's been the most intellectual work that I've done, because I think every day is problem solving. Very little is process and implementation. Every day is, okay, how do I solve this problem? Then once I've decided the how, I'll figure out how I'll go about it, right? But what is the answer? We're stuck at that so often. So I think that's the most defining feature of the work at Villgro. But also, because Villgro requires me to sort of change so many hats, it also brings together the learnings from previous jobs, whether it's working with process, right? You can't get so many things done at the same time unless you have certain processes and respect for processes in place. Also, the team is so different with every startup. So that little bit of exposure that I had to diversity in my first job after B school, that kind of has helped me here, just understanding folks from different landscapes. And from Saahas, I'd definitely say that you have to bring that mindset when you're working in agriculture and sustainability as well. A lot of resilience and a lot of positivity that, okay, it's a hard problem, but we're going to figure it out. So yeah, so at least so far, I'm really glad that it's tying well together, and it's also keeping me engaged. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, no, I think it absolutely sounds like it has tied well together. And I'm sure when you work with a range of startups and startup founders, your past experiences on what it actually takes, by working within a social enterprise as well, I'm sure that adds a lot of value and understanding. So I think
Yes.
it does tie in quite beautifully. So, Matthew, maybe uh, last question from my end is, what would you
Yeah.
recommend to someone who's interested in working in this space, right? Whether it's social enterprises or transitioning from corporate to social enterprises. Um, any suggestions that you might have on, how they can think about starting off?
Right. So I think a couple of things from my own experience, and of course, it could be different for others, but I think to start with a topic that really interests you, that you're passionate about, because a lot of work in the social sector can be uphill. So, unless you have that passion that's going to pull you through some of the lows and some of the tough situations, it's a little difficult to hold on. So, and I've seen colleagues, friends, kind of get disillusioned and leave. So I think it's important that you come in with some passion. Exploratory is fine, but there should be that basic passion. Otherwise, you may not find it worth your while. So
Mhm.
you must feel a little aligned to the problem. And the second is I did it in reverse. I sort of worked with the sectoral focus area first and then moved to a broad based kind of role. But I think my advice to anyone who's starting out would be that starting with a broad based role is great, like probably starting with an incubator as an analyst or an associate with an investor, understanding the landscape, seeing which problems you feel the most towards, where your skill sets can be best used to solve, and then probably move into a solution area. It could be either in the form of setting up your own venture, becoming an entrepreneur. It could also be in the form of joining an existing enterprise that's working in the space. But I think there's a little more clarity about which out of those various pieces you want to kind of work with the most. And a lot of these broad-based roles give you a lot of exposure, even when we go for events, for conferences. A lot of these topics are covered. It's if I'm going for a conference in agriculture, they won't solely be talking about cultivation and crops and that. It will extend to land and water systems. It will extend to climate change. So it does constantly open your mind. It's a good place to start and sort of then decide. And if you like it, then you don't move, right? So that it works out. I mean, I would think that works out well both ways. But either way, whether you sort of start broad and then funnel down, or go the reverse, the most important is spending time in the field. I think the best memories, the most hard hitting ones, are the ones when you're standing at the brink of a landfill or a material recovery facility and looking at the waste, or talking to a farmer and hearing their woes about a climate change attempt which was only well intentioned and yet has caused so much pain to the people it was meant to help. And that's when
Mhm.
you get some perspective on the work that you're doing. So yeah, I think those are the three things I would use to navigate myself and could be of use to someone else: passion, um, um, broad-based vantage point, and some time in the field.
That's absolutely spot on, I think, mentally. And thank you so much for sharing that. And for everyone listening, I seriously hope you've noted these down, because I think this was just absolutely a really brilliant summary of how people can really think about this. So thank you once again for that and for this entire conversation. I think it was so great to learn more about your journey, and definitely pretty fascinating so far.
Thank you, Rachna. Glad to have been a part of this. And I think the work that Path Builder is doing to make careers that are not that conventional understood outside of the community that works in them is so important. I feel, in fact, a lot of the transitions in this journey was because I was finding my way. And probably if I had been in touch with folks who had been in the sector before, the movement would have been faster. So thank you, Rachna.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's what we're here to do. And thanks everyone for listening in. We hope to see you on our next podcast series as well. Thanks again. Cheers.
Bye.